we're going to get started in just a minute here, but just for the people that are joining the call, you are on mute and off video. And if you have any thoughts or comments or anything, you can put them into the comment section. We will be recording it, so you can so you can actually see it afterwards as well. We'll be posting it on YouTube and Facebook. But yeah, I think we can probably get us started. Yeah. So I'll just be right here and join you this way.
Okay.
It's not already. It is recording up in the top. Oh, it's just recording. Cool. Well, then we'll pretend that now is the moment.
Okay.
On to our second installment of Fred Talks. Today we have the team from the Mongerson Gallery here to talk to us about the arts industry and selling art, connecting with museums, and all sorts of other things. We're really excited to have you all here to share your knowledge with us. Thank you so much for being a part of the Remington community here. And I won't bore you with too much else other than thank you to the Northern New York Community Foundation and the Badenhausen Legacy Fund for supporting this and other educational programs here at the Frederic Remington Art Museum. Thank you so much, all. Sarah, take it away.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having us today. And thanks for all the preparation that went into this. We appreciate it. We love to talk about art and we love to talk about our business. So this is fun for us. I'll just briefly introduce everybody. I'm Sara Mongerson. I'm the president of Mongerson Gallery. Joining me here is Jack Spector-Bishop. He is the director of the gallery, and Katie Sullivan, who's our assistant director. We're all going to talk about some different things today. And, you know, maybe Jack and Katie, you can talk a little bit about your backgrounds too when it's your turn. So I am new to the gallery. I've been around the gallery a large portion of my adult life. I'll start by talking a little bit about the history of who we are, and then get into a little bit about the gallery business, how it's evolving, and what services we typically provide. And then Katie and Jack will take over and talk a little bit more about you know, how we research and authenticate, which is a big part of what we do, how we price things, and all the different work that I think people don't always know that goes into the gallery business. My background is actually not necessarily in art, although I will say that when I started college, I'm the product of teacher parents, so I always had an exposure to the arts growing up. And I started as a music major and I left with a finance degree. So I am probably equally left and right brains, but having been involved in this as an adult through originally my husband and now through the business, I definitely have a love for it. Our gallery was founded in 1971 by my in-laws, Mel and Susan Mongerson Wunderlich. They started it in the 70s because they had a love of sporting and wildlife and the arts. And very shortly after they founded the gallery, we quickly evolved to specializing in Western and Western expansion. We always have dealt in museum quality American art from the 19th century to current. In 1985, the gallery was joined by a gentleman, some of you may be familiar, Rudy Wunderlich. He was the former president of Kennedy Gallery in New York City. And I believe that's where the relationship with the Remington Art Museum first was sort of established and, you know, at least got more close and connected. My husband grew up around the business. It was a family business. And when he became an adult in the 90s, in 1990, he joined first as an employee and then eventually assumed running the gallery as head in 1999. Unfortunately, he is now since deceased. He passed away in 2023, and that's when I took over. And, you know, we're still here today and still running. So it's, you know, we're over 50 years old. We have been certainly involved with the art of Frederic Remington and other Taos founders and Western. And then over time, our scope has expanded. A lot of that had to do with Tyler and various areas of interest, always in the 19th and 20th century American and early modern art. But part of that had to do with our location in Chicago and some of the other great art that has come out of the Midwest. And then some of it had to do with the fact that Western inventory is just scarce. It's really hard to come by. Our clients don't want to let go of their art and transfer it to someone new. It's hard to find. And so for us to continue in business, it just sort of made sense to continue to expand. So if you look at our website, you'll see all kinds of different art and artists, but there are themes that sort of work through all of the art that we tend to get involved with. Most of what we do are deceased artists. We tend to like themes of things like movement of people and populations. So that could be the movement across, the Wild West, the Great Migration, regionalists. We have recently gotten involved with the migration north. We deal with some Black art out of Detroit. So there are, themes there that on the surface, when you first look at it, might seem different, but sort of make sense. We have also gotten involved with some areas like Chicago female surrealists. We represent the estate of Neil. There's connections to the Jazz Age. So it's stuff like that we enjoy. There's another artist that we have brought into inventory, Denver Gillen. That's an interesting story because it's sort of a unique theme. He also was an illustrator, although he, unlike Frederic Remington, he worked for Reader's Digest and Outdoor Living, and ended up doing the Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer series for Montgomery Ward. But then he became a more serious artist later in his life. And so again, we just see interesting themes that make sense, that are similar, and that's the kind of stuff that we like to get involved in. I also just wanted to briefly, we put out a piece earlier this week, and so I thought I'd mention this too, because I think it relates to the art business in general. It's been an interesting time. My background is actually, as I mentioned, in finance and investing. So I am definitely always paying attention to what's going on in the world and current markets. It's been an interesting
platform, and how are these schools who are utilizing Discord kind of in that same vein? But yeah, they mentioned private channels as kind of the main way they're doing that. But yeah, I just wanted to share a little bit there. And then we went through the agenda with them. I
think we have someone else joining
today with the committee and got great feedback there. I'm actually going to share like a more updated version of the agenda today, just because we had one small change even yesterday, but they had great feedback for us.
Yeah, maybe you can mute them. There we go. Great. Thank you. And so getting back to what we were talking about, I think it's interesting just to note art in general as an asset class too. Museums and collectors, most of the time we think about art in terms of its beauty and, the way that we think about things, but it's also something that people invest in and put money into. And, we've been talking about that some recently with, the recent tariff situation and the market volatility in the stock market. And it's an interesting to approach it as an asset class. So I like to think about it in both ways because the value and the performance tend to be uncorrelated to things like a volatile stock market. And it tends to hold its value during times of market uncertainty and can really act as a diversifier and inflation hedge. So it's fun to get into some of those conversations as well as we, look at our collectors who maybe own Remingtons or something else, and over time, because one of the things that we as a gallery, are paying a lot of attention to is the direction of art prices. I thought I'd take a minute to talk about the gallery business and how it's been evolving. I've seen it a lot in my tenure, particularly just being around it, when my husband was running it and now. There's a lot of changes that are happening in the art business. One of them is that physical space matters less. COVID really drove that home, and that I think that's happened, in other markets and other areas too. But we have recently gone private, which means that we have a space, but we're not necessarily open on the street anymore. We do by appointment only. Space matters a little bit less. COVID, online shopping, there were some issues in some of the major cities with rioting a couple of years ago. And so having a storefront is a different situation nowadays than it used to be. And you can't really rely on walk-in traffic for sales anymore. So we have spent a lot of time over the last couple of years with our online and digital connectivity as a way to reach clients. So, we put in a CRM system that connects to our website. It allows for contact management. It also helps us track our inventory. We put a lot of time into updating our website. We've been putting more time into expanding our outreach with things like newsletters. We've been dabbling in social media. I have to admit, at my age, I'm not an influencer or an expert by any means, but I think it's something that we've seen with our friendly competitors. Jack and Katie are certainly more familiar with that, and I think over time we'll probably continue to expand some of that. Things like these Zoom meetings are becoming more and more common. We meet often with our clients digitally now instead of in person. Another thing that we've noticed in the industry is that the younger, newer buyers that are up and coming want way more education about art than we have seen in the past. So, we're doing things like beefing up our newsletters when we talk about an artist to talk a little bit more about the artist and their past and the history and how it all ties together than we have before. Another thing that I'm paying attention to right now are art fairs. It's the season right now. We have one starting in a little over a week in Chicago, a big one. There have been several already occurring in New York and more to come. We have dabbled in that in the past. They're an interesting thing post-COVID. Attendance was quite down for a while. Some of the art fairs are very, very expensive to participate in, and they can make or break a business. And so we're currently not doing much with that. We do stop by and attend, especially the ones that are local here. But something I'm kind of paying attention to right now and trying to figure out whether, those kinds of things make sense anymore. And I've had conversations with some of our friendly competitors who are either trying them again after several years or thinking about it. And, that's still to be determined, I think. Another thing we've been doing is partnering with other businesses. We recently held an exhibition in Chicago where we partnered up with a design studio and hung art in the studio, had a few other businesses also participate where we had the ability to invite our clients from all of our different client bases. There's some connectivity between architects and designers, investors and some other things. And, people are looking for unique experiences now. Again, I mentioned the walk-in traffic before. So, we're trying new things with that. And I think we'll continue to look at different ways that we can do that. Our event was successful. I guess it was just last month or so. And I think we'll continue to think about that. With all that being said, it's still a people business. And that's, relationships are very important. I think our approach in particular goes back to the history and the very founding of the gallery with our family relationships. We think a lot about legacy. That goes back with the Remington Art Museum, that goes back with, our history of family members at the gallery. Tyler in particular this is something that sticks in my head all the time, and he would talk about it. And when, we'd talk over dinner about whatever was going on with the business, when we would throw openings back when we used to host a lot of them, it was really about the legacy and the long-term relationships, various family members who, his stepfather and his family may have worked with the first generation, and artwork gets passed down a lot through generations, and maintaining that connectivity is important, and really always being honorable and doing the right thing and always thinking the best interest of our clients and acting with honor. So, the art business, there's a lot of it's not regulated. It's sort of an interesting business. And so we think it's really, really important to always be transparent and do the right thing. With that, I thought maybe I could talk a little bit about what services we as a gallery provide, and some of that sort of connects us back to the museums, and then I'll turn it over to the rest of the team. We're in the business of bringing buyers and sellers together. So we earn a commission when there's this transaction that we help complete, or sometimes we take art into actual inventory where then we own it and then we resell it. Hopefully, the prices increase, and then the difference between the two is how we make a profit. But there's a lot of other services that go into that too. So we offer collection advice. We have some very serious collectors who, have different approaches to how they some of them want one example of everything. Some of them are collecting certain groups of artists. Some of them are looking to have examples from various different types and segments in the art, but all within a certain date range or something like that. And so we act as a sounding board. We keep our eye out for available pieces when we know someone's looking for something, or when we think about their collection. We help with collection management. So there's, art is a physical, real asset. So, there's physical storage issues. Some of our collectors do hang things in their homes, but some of them are, buying it for a collection for various reasons. And so, they have to figure out where they're going to keep it and keep it safe and keep it well preserved. There's restoration issues, preservation issues, insurance issues involved in all of that. So, sometimes that has to do with valuation. Sometimes that has to do with location. We need to be well versed in all of those areas. We get involved with estate planning sometimes when people are, thinking it could be having to do with taxes. It could have to do with donations. It could have to do with passing their art down and how they're going to share it with their family in the future. And so while we are not experts in tax and tax management, we are aware and familiar and can give some basic advice and then help connect people with the right appropriate professionals so that they can handle that. Sometimes we get involved in publications and raisonnés because we know where art is, we know where private collections are. So, we can help with the academic side of art research. We do art appraisals, as I mentioned. Sometimes it's for insurance purposes, sometimes it's for estate purposes, sometimes it's for purposes of determining how to price something to then take it to market and sell it. And I think Jack and Katie will get into that and how that works a little bit more. Sometimes it's our job to actually develop a market for an artist. So I mentioned earlier the Harold Neal estate. We could get involved where we represent the family, and we are doing that. And sometimes an artist may be at a certain level, but for various reasons, there might be some more education needed out into the public, or we want other museums to know more about this particular artist, or we have a group of pieces, and so it's our job to also be educators. We help with auction services. Sometimes people have collections, sometimes they're, art sometimes can be difficult to find the right buyer, or it makes more sense in a grouping to send them to auction. And we have relationships with various auction houses, and we just happen to know, who likes certain things, or how we can connect people. Sometimes if there's a death in the family or something like that, people are a little bit paralyzed in how to deal with it and what to do. And, we assist a lot with that. We can assist with charitable donations. So that's where some of our connectivity to museums come in, and nonprofits. Sometimes we can help broker that situation, or sometimes museums know they're hunting a certain artist or a certain piece, and we can be helpful in connecting for that. And finally, we get involved sometimes with artwork with regards to authentication. One of the things about the art business is there are fakes and replications out there. And, again, the part of being honorable, we don't want art circulating around if it's not authentic. So sometimes we do this with bronze sculptures, example, the Remington. Sometimes we do this with other pieces. There's a lot that goes into that too, with relating to provenance. And I think, Jackie, you're going to talk a little bit more about the various ways we look at that. But these are all services that we provide to our clients. Sometimes we do it for a fee. Sometimes it's just part of what we're doing when we're looking to sell a piece. It just depends on the circumstance. Finally, I thought I would talk a little bit about, some of the benefits of working with a gallery versus working with auction houses. The auction houses are showy and there's a lot of press. And, in some ways they're partners of ours, in some ways they're competitors of ours, sorry. And so, there's some things that we can do that maybe they can't do. But first and foremost is privacy. Sometimes buyers and sellers don't want people to know that they're involved in something. And there's some of that can be done through, an auction, but we can keep everything private if necessary, including price. There's an exclusivity component to this sometimes with certain pieces. And so again, we have the ability to sort of, we know about certain things and where they are. And it just is another way, that we can either protect information or provide information. Again, provenance, I think I mentioned that before. We have a lot of knowledge of where stuff is, especially gallery like ours. It's been around for over 50 years. So, it's our job to protect that information sometimes, but it also can be helpful when trying to do something like authenticating. Pricing is another area. The auction prices are public, and you can see those. But we know about private sales, either that we've done or our gallery competitor friends have done. And so sometimes that allows us to actually be a little bit more accurate on where the market is. And then finally, it's really about networking. So we know private collectors, we know dealers, we know museums, and, we're just another way of connecting in a different way than, some of the other types of groups might be. So that's all I had prepared to talk about. I'm going to turn it over now to Jack and Katie, and they'll get a little bit more into the details of some of the things I mentioned.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry I couldn't unmute myself. My name is Katie. I'm the assistant director of the gallery. A little bit about my background. I have a master's degree in art history, so I really come from a research background in art history. I have a history working in museums. I was at the Smithsonian for years, at the Hirshhorn, and I also have a history in private collection management of high net worth individuals. So I have a bit of a varied past that got me here, but I'm very happy to be here now. And I'm going to talk a little bit about research and authentication. Sara touched on this a bit. So like we said, a lot of what we do comes down to authenticating and really learning the history of the pieces. It provides value, monetarily, but it also provides value in what we learn about the history of the artist and the story that we tell with the artist. So the idea of provenance is a history of everyone who has owned the work of art or the locations that it has been in. Generally, in a perfect world, we'd be able to get the provenance of artists very easily, but that's just not the case. Unless an artist was very famous in their lifetime, the reality is that we are just not going to know the full provenance. So generally what we aim for is a partial provenance. The idea is that we would like to know from the moment that it left the artist's workshop who owned it, maybe within a family, maybe within different museums. But there's a few ways that we can manage to learn what we can. First of all, when we talk to the person who currently owns the work of art, we just try to get as much information as we can. When they bought it, who they bought it from. It's very helpful when people who own the work of art hold detailed records, but the reality is that most people just don't, and that's okay. So we look at the biography of the artist, the time period that the work was created in, maybe where they were. We also have a lot of records within our own gallery as to how we can go about learning more about it. Part of that is just the correspondence over the years that we've had with other people who collect the art or people who are within the field. Like Sarah said, we've been around for over 50 years, so we just have a lot of access to information that many people don't have, and that's really helpful. The other thing is that there's generally a material history on the painting itself or work of art. So an example of this is currently within the gallery, we have a painting by Preston Dickinson, and on the back we have stickers of everywhere it's been exhibited or every gallery that it has been held by. So we have a sticker from the Whitney showing us when it was exhibited, and things like that. That can be really helpful, just having that kind of material history. But the reality is that a lot of it comes from scholars. Scholars are really helpful in books and catalogs. A lot of really time-consuming research has to go into establishing a timeline in these artists' life. And so a lot will create catalogs or lists of the full works of every artist, and they'll try to get a general sense of who owned what at what time. So that is really important, but also it's just going to be down to records kept by collectors. We have wonderful, wonderful clients who have kept detailed records trying to learn about the artist's life that they've then passed on to the gallery to help us create that history, create that story behind the artist, and educate people who want to learn more about the artist. That's really helpful. But the reality is it's not just us as galleries. At museums, at the top levels of art history, top levels is a loose term, but provenance is really, really challenging. It's really amazing when you go on websites now for museums, you can check a provenance of most works of art, and it can say, it was in this family for a long time. But the reality is that some of these works of art are very old, and there's just no way that we can have an idea of where it was at all times, which is challenging. Provenance is really important when considering the work that has been done on a piece of art and just what it's been through. So it's really important to the story. Another part of that is how we authenticate works of art. If we don't have a full provenance, it can be challenging to know whether the work of art is real. Like Sarah said, it's a reality of working in the art world. Fakes can be very good sometimes, and we just want to know that what we are working with is authentic. So we have to look at things like was it considered authentic by other institutions it was held at? Was it in museum exhibitions? And even just have other people done research into it. There's a lot that maybe Jack, Sarah, and I can do just by looking at it. We compare signatures. We can look at the style. Oftentimes with the artists we work with, we're really familiar with their work, and we're able to look at it and know to a certain extent whether it's real or not. We consult the catalog raisonnés that I mentioned. We have extensive lists of just works by Frederic Remington. And if we're looking at a work of art and we don't see it in that catalog raisonné, obviously it raises some alarm bells. We also consult, we have a vast network of researchers and scientists who are really able to look at the material. And living in this day and age, there's a lot of really cool non-invasive ways to research the material, to look at it on a scientific level, to look at what time it was created in, what materials were used, whether that would be authentic. And another thing is that we just consult our, as Sarah said, friendly competitors. We're a really close group, a really close field. And if someone is having trouble authenticating a work of art, that's really a problem for everyone. It's helpful for everyone to know that we can come together and help authenticate a work of art. So like I said, occasionally we will take a physical analysis of materials. So how that applies to something like Remington bronzes is actually really interesting. Generally, what we'll do is we'll take a file, kind of like a nail file, and we'll take a slight shaving. It's very non-intrusive, I promise. And we will collect the shreds of the bronze, send it to a lab, and we'll look at the materials used and know whether they are authentic and what was available at that time, because there's such a wide research basis on what Remington used. It's really easy to look at something and know whether it would have been accurate to that time or not. So that's really helpful. And then I will pass it on to Jack.
Okay, hi everyone. Thanks for having us this morning. I'm Jack. As Sarah mentioned, I'm the director of the gallery. Um, I have been with the gallery for 3 years now, I believe this spring. My background is also a little varied, just like Katie's. My real background is in print, fine art printmaking. That's my knowledge base before I got into the Western game. And I also work pretty extensively in contemporary, emerging artists here in Chicago. So kind of all over the place. So Katie did a great job talking about provenance, and I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of things we take into account when we are doing the next step, which is appraising or providing either replacement value or market value estimations for artworks in people's collections. So it's a constellation of a lot of different considerations. None of them come to the fore. It's not like there's one baseline rule. You kind of collect as much data as you can from a lot of different sources and make a judgment based on how those things interact with each other. So there's a certain amount that you can tell with appraisal concerns just from looking at the physical artwork. So the medium matters immensely. Painting is worth more than drawing. Drawings are worth more than prints. It has always been that way. Um, whether that's based or not, who's to say, but that is the convention in the market. So you're going to be looking at what the medium is first. Is it an oil painting? Is it a watercolor on paper? Works on paper in general, even if their paintings tend to be valued less. You're also going to be looking at the condition. How has the artwork held up? Is there paint loss? Is there dust? Is it stretched poorly? Are there any things that would either make it show less well, so look, less beautiful in a collector's home or in a museum wall, or potentially put it in danger of degradation in someone's collection? Does it look like it's going to fall apart anymore and then depreciate the value? Size is also a huge consideration. It's just true, bigger is better. A way that we talk about paintings a lot is price per square inch. So something that we do, and I'll get to this later when we're consulting auction resources, every auction result has a price per square inch. So frequently I will create an average of price per square inches across an artist's auction catalog, and that can be really helpful in triangulating. So those are some of the things that you can tell just by looking at the physical thing in front of you. And then you move onwards to thinking about, okay, how does this fall within to history and how does this fall within to the artist's career? So this is probably obvious, but who the artist was matters immensely. Famous artists like Frederic Remington will be valued higher than a much lesser known, even contemporary of Frederic Remington, who did not receive as much praise or critical acclaim either in their lifetime or after. So yeah, who the artist is first and foremost. And then there's a kind of what Katie was saying about telling the story about the artwork. The story you can tell about an artwork can really change its value. So obviously the quality of, the subject matter of the work really matters. I know in Remington, he did a lot of illustrations that were of things outside of the Western scene, and those tend to be valued a little bit less than his illustrations and paintings of classic Western scenes. And that will change depending on the artist. So that's part of the research of, okay, is this a standard subject matter for the artist? Is this the type of subject matter that people really value in this artist's oeuvre? And then historical significance as well. Is it a portrait of a famous person? Is it a portrait of an important patron of the artist? Does it depict a historical event? Can it tell a story about when the artist was living, the things that they were thinking about, that kind of thing? And that really helps you craft a narrative around a work of art that can make it very compelling to buyers. Provenance is also a part of that. We have a painting in inventory right now that was commissioned and owned by a mayor of Chicago. So that's a story you can tell. What Katie was saying about prior museum exhibitions, look at the back of it. Was it exhibited in the Whitney Museum, like in the early 20th century? That would greatly increase the value of the work. what was the date of the creation within the artist's career? Many times artists will have, even if they worked and were creating art for, 60 years of their career, certain earlier works or works when they were working in a very specific style are more desirable. So that's a lot of, looking at their entire work and how this piece fits within it, and part of telling the story. And beyond telling the story about a specific work, of course, there are general market considerations to take into account. American Impressionism is a good example, where the market and desirability of American Impressionism just has really depreciated in the last several decades, where at other times in history it was incredibly high. So that's sort of a concern that is sort of removed from the artwork itself, removed from the history, because American Impressionism is still immensely historically important to, telling a story about American images and American painters, but there are vast market trends that go up and down. And I think that as contemporary trends shift, the way we look to historical art changes. I think we work a lot with Gertrude Abercrombie, who is a mid-century Chicago surrealist who has seen a huge amount of attention and market desirability in the last decade. My armchair analysis is that the new interest in her work can be linked to trends in contemporary art. I think surrealism and figuration has become a lot more popular in recent decades, and that I think has allowed for a certain reappraisal of her work looking backwards. So things like that. There are vast market trends in subject matter, style, identity of the artist that really can change desirability for an artist or a specific work over its time. So some resources that we consult when we are appraising artworks can really run the gambit, and kind of similar to assessing provenance. We really just want to cover all of our bases, know as much as we can about the work, know as much as we can about the artist and how the work fits into the artist's oeuvre and how the artist fits into American art history. So as I mentioned, auction records are incredibly helpful. Sara talked a little bit about the difference between private sale, which is what we handle, and auctions. So auction records are by definition public. When you sell your artwork at auction, it hammers for a price and that price is published. So that transparency makes it incredibly useful to gauge desirability for a certain kind of artwork. We have this Remington oil painting and we have a ton of people in a room and they are bidding up, and it can be a good litmus test for desirability in general. Now, I always advise our clients to sometimes take auction records with a grain of salt. Not every record can be taken as silver bullet truth to an artist's desirability. Venue matters a lot. There are a lot of different auction houses. Some of them are much smaller. Some of them are much larger. They tap different markets. So it's not out of the ordinary to see an auction with a lower or smaller audience have hammers that are perhaps lower than perhaps Christie's or Sotheby's. And sometimes different issues of the piece can be concealed. There might be a piece that hammers very low for reasons that aren't immediately clear, but perhaps there was a condition issue or a provenance question that collectors in the room or people bidding on it knew about that are not always clear when you're just looking at an auction record from 10 years ago. So understanding that. And then on the other side of things, as I mentioned, we engage in private sales, which prices are not transparent, but working with our friendly competitors, we're able to ask around. So we know of, prices that we have sold artwork for. That's a data point for us. Feedback from collectors and clients that we work with is really helpful in us determining desirability to set a fair market price, and also speaking to other galleries and dealers, saying what has your experience with this type of artwork been? What the clients that you're working with, how desirable are they seeing this material? So a lot of that is, I would say, especially in period Western, working with other dealers, working with other galleries, and really sharing our knowledge is incredibly useful in trying to determine market value. And then, as I said, understanding the market in general. were times in the past couple decades where the whole art market was a little bit depressed, or the art market for a specific artist was a little bit depressed. And being able to think about the larger trends as they go up and down, and know that maybe a couple years of depressed hammers at auction is not necessarily indicative of a complete depreciation in value of that artist or the artwork. Yeah, I think I wanted to talk more, but I guess I wanted to leave some time for questions. How are we doing on time?
I'm meeting. We are at 12:40, so we can take till the hour, I think. But if you do want to continue, does anybody have a burning question to ask right now? If so, you can raise your hand or unmute at this point. I believe that is now an option. I have a couple questions, but I want to let anybody else jump in first. Well, let me ask my question then, because it's kind of I hope it's interesting to others. I'm wondering if you can speak to the current sentiments about Remington, specifically that any kind of conversations that you have with your collectors, as well as what does the market for his work look like right now, or in recent.
I think we can all have a few things to say, and it's very strong. There is, I think I was mentioning early on, there is a high demand for period Western art, Remington being the top of that list. It's scarce right now. There's not a lot of movement between private dealers, auctions, and so that has actually been a bit of a challenge. We are constantly on a hunt is probably the easiest way to say it. I think, prices are strong. Demand is high. We are seeing a younger generation with interest in the space. And it's interesting, actually, Jack was talking about, even over the last decade, there are things that occur, sometimes it's sort of political, sometimes it's other, with areas of interest. You might have thought back a handful of years ago, something that sort of goes through the glory days of Western expansion. And, there's two stories to that. It's been romanticized over time in history, but there's the other side of it, which was sort of the, complete disrespect of the local population. And it's how that gets treated nowadays. And there are ebbs and flows to all of that, but we haven't seen, so at different times, Tyler and I used to talk about this 20 years ago. Do we have to be concerned about the Western market? Because there used to be a very specific type of buyer who was interested in that. And the wealth in the United States is changing, and the owners of that wealth is changing, and their areas of interest might be different. But we really haven't seen that so far happen. And if anything, it's sort of an interesting time. Western things, cowboy things, it's very chic and popular right now in pop culture. I think we were talking early in the week about the upcoming Beyonce tour and Cowboy Carter. And that certainly has not done anything to hurt the interest in the Wild West. Jack and Katie, I don't know if you either want to add additional comments before we, switch, but those are my thoughts.
Yeah, I could say a few things. I think your question made me of how working with clients, their reactions and thoughts on Remington makes me think one of the most interesting things about my job working with collectors is trying to understand what drives people to purchase original art for their home, what drives them to value it. And I think with Remington and period Western art, it really runs the gambit. We have what I lovingly call nerd collectors, people who are just history buffs, and they know everything about Remington, know everything about Russell, they know everything about the Taos founders, and they read books about them, they learn about their whole lives, and their goal in assembling collections is to like build this, like I need an example of every single one of them. And this one, the Sharp painted this painting when he was, hanging out with like, Dunton and all that. And I think Remington is very similar, where some people just, it's such, as at the Remington Art Museum, his life and his work is such a rich text. And I think a lot of our clients still feel very intellectually driven by that. And then you have another side of it where people, younger collectors, older collectors, maybe are putting their roots down in the West, whether it's in New Mexico or the Colorado or Montana, and they feel a connection to the landscape and the history around them. And through that, maybe they buy their first ranch. They are interested in decorating it with scenes from history and artworks that make them feel more connected to that. So I think that's something we see a lot as well in how our like collectors respond to things. And it's funny, I know you you guys are in Ogdensburg, but for anyone here who's traveled in the West or been to the West, I was in New Mexico for a good amount of time this summer. It really is just a magical place. And I think when you go there, you feel this natural, I don't know, enchantment with both the natural beauty around you and the history of its creation, both the good sides and the bad, as Sara mentioned. And I think that naturally drives people to want to dig into the history of its depictions and the way that the story of the West fits into not just the story of America, but the story of images in America in general. So that's maybe a little wishy-washy, but that's what your question made me think about.
Yeah, and just to add, I mean, as they both mentioned, a lot of our job is trend forecasting, is looking at, okay, maybe this older generation is selling off their collection, and will that be attractive to younger collectors? That's always something that we have to consider. And a lot of it, as they both said, comes down to a changing in ways that we look at art and a changing in ways that we tend to appreciate it. So whether or not we're looking at it in the same way as we used to, the bottom line is that people are still appreciating the work of Frederic Remington from a historical and from a just interest in his story. And so it's really an amazing thing that works like this can really transcend generations.
That is so fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on that. I really love the nerd collectors thought there, and we'd love to get those people to come in and like see our collection, see all the ephemera that we have within our collection as well. So I hope that we can make some deeper connections with you moving forward. I know that Mongerson Gallery has been involved with acquisitions that we've had here at the gallery a number of over decades. So major thank you to your whole team, and of course to Tyler for all the work that he did to support this museum. I also have another question, then we can take questions from the rest of the team. I'm sure this will be especially will light up Michael Reed's ears, because he's our Sally James Farnham expert on our board of directors or board of trustees. But how do you think a gallery could contribute to building up a lesser known artist like our beloved Sally James Farnham?
Maybe we can all three sort of participate that again, because there's different things that we can do. One of the things, we do host exhibitions ourselves. And we've done that recently. As I mentioned before, the way that we do that is changing a little bit. Some of our contemporary gallery owners have even tried doing online exhibitions recently and had some success with that. So I think things like that are part of it, because our reach is going to be a little bit different than your reach. And so some of it's about that. We are fortunate in that we're connected to not all, but some of the press. And so sometimes we get some coverage. And that certainly can help. And so that's, another way. And then, as I was mentioning before, it has become our job to educate our clients. And so collaborating with museums on the story and the history and sharing that as broadly as possible is one of those ways. Jack, Katie, you guys want to?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we've had such an interesting experience with building up the market for an artist in our work with the estate of Harold Neal, who is a African American Black arts movement artist who lived in Detroit in the 20th century. I know very different from Remington, but that's been a direct experience we've had with that. And I think telling the story is a huge part of it, doing research into the artist's life and making a compelling case for why people should care about the work. And then painting the town with that information, doing artists and artists estate require a communication strategy, just like making anything popular. And I think that's a big part of it. And connecting with the people that for other reasons, will care about the story, are engaged in that type of artwork already. So a lot of our work has been connecting with Detroit collectors, collectors of African American art in general, and saying, hey, have you heard of this artist? He had a really interesting story. This was his life. This is how he was involved in activism. This is how his artwork speaks to his life and the moment in history that he lived. So I would say it's crafting the story and then finding compelling places to tell that story and the right people to tell it to. And as Sara mentioned, partnering with other institutions. So museums are hugely powerful in shaping the story around an artist and providing a lesser known artist sort of legitimacy and also providing their research credentials to be able to tell that story even better, and partnering with other dealers to make a larger name for an artist. Katie, do you have anything to add?
No, not really. You guys said it really well. I mean, I always think that people don't really know what art history is. They hear the word and they think of it as what their mom studied in college and they kind of look down on it. But the reality is that when people really engage with those stories and they hear it, they're always going to be interested. And it's really rewarding. It's a really rewarding part of our job to see people really engage with the stories of the artists that we love so much and really become just as passionate as we are.
I love that we share that passion, and it's such a pleasure to work with you. And as you know, I've been here for just over a year, and so I'm really excited to have you be a part of our team in this way and joining us on this call and everything else. We actually have some interesting ideas for our America 250 celebration that I think I really look forward to connecting with you on a little bit further too. Does anybody in the audience have any questions? Would you like to put questions in the chat or unmute yourselves? I'll just pause for a moment, seeing if I can see who's here. Thank you so much to everyone who has come. I'm really pleased to see all these wonderful, wonderful people. Any questions? Jack, I kind of cut you off earlier. If you wanted to add anything else as well, you're welcome to.
Gosh, I mean, it's even preparing this presentation, we were like, God, there's so much we could just go on and on and on. What do you want to know about? Yeah, it's interesting. I guess one thing I left out is the difference that we talk to about clients a lot is the difference between replacement value and market value. Granular, but I felt like it was something that I forgot to include when we do appraisals. Of course, the purpose of the appraisal matters a lot. A lot of the time people are trying to insure their artwork. And in that case, we provide replacement values, which are usually about 30% higher than market value, but sometimes it can change because replacement value by definition reflects the amount this one would theoretically have to spend to replace that exact work. Now, because almost all the time the works are completely unique, you couldn't replace it precisely. in the event of a loss, but to get something like it. And because of how the market works and the costs of trying to acquire high quality works at a short turnaround, replacement value often ends up being so much higher because the cost of entering and leaving a stake at market can be such a high premium when you're trying to get a replacement piece in a short turnaround or get a very precise thing. Market value can often be lower because it just represents what we believe, based on our research, a willing seller and willing buyer would exchange the work for. So that's a big difference when we provide appraisals, is what type of appraisal is it? And different types of research go into the appraisals. We have a question from Julia, who is a modern artist who is currently exciting to each of you? That's so difficult.
I know. I was looking at that and I
Yeah.
don't know the answer. I think, Jack, you probably have the best idea.
Oh gosh. I mean, I'm just gonna say blue chip artists because they're like the easiest ones to come to my head. Julie Meritou, Nicole Eisenman are really high on my list. There was a wonderful Nicole Eisenman retrospective at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago last year. I'll have to do some more things.
Yeah.
It's too many things to name, but I'm curious about what Katie and Sarah will say.
Gosh, I don't
I'll give
know.
you guys time to think if you want. So at the gallery, we rarely work with live artists. We've done a few things here and there, but not much. Our expertise is more museum quality, 19th and 20th century art. But even with that, and there are a couple that we at the gallery started with years ago. We're going to be doing some sort of exhibition next month with Julia Thekla. She is not alive. She was a Chicago female surrealist. She was a contemporary of Gertrude Abercrombie's. The Abercrombie, Jack was talking about that market. That market's insane right now. And I think it's the combination of interest in female artists. Over the last year, museums have been celebrating the 100th year of surrealism. So there's been a lot of exhibitions, special exhibitions going on across the world. And then specifically, Katie got to go to the opening of, there's a traveling exhibition specific to Gertrude Abercrombie. And it's the first time in a really long time that those pieces have been brought together in a large group where you can see them together. And Julia Thekla was a contemporary of Gertrude's. She was also here in Chicago. We call them, again, talking about the private research and stuff that we see. The owner of some of the stuff we have on consignment knew the artist during her lifetime and had some correspondence and some other things that we have had the ability to poke through. And they were sort of frenemies. So it's interesting. They influenced each other. They were around each other. They were friends, but also not. They said mean things about each other sometimes. They were artists, so they're kind of kooky. And her works, Julia's, have not taken off to the extent that Gertrude Abercrombie's, but they're really interesting. There's been some auctions. I was personally bidding on something recently and it got kind of hot and I lost. But it's one that I'm watching closely because I think there's some interesting opportunity. And I just personally really like the stories and the connection to Chicago. And, they were women who were ahead of their time and sort of acted out in ways that wasn't necessarily acceptable to women then. And myself, having grown up in the finance industry when there were issues with women, I just connect with that story. So, that's one. I think about Charles McGee a lot, who was a contemporary of Harold Neal, who's a state represent. Charles McGee was another Black Detroit artist. They were friends. They had a gallery together. They taught art together. I had the privilege of meeting Harold Neal because we do carry some of his work. And he died recently. And so Tyler and I started collecting his art kind of early on. It also has taken off. I really like his early, more figurative work. This is something else Jack talked about, sort of the the time periods, the artists and the way they do things and stuff changes over time. And early on in his early days, he did more people and portraits in everyday life. And then over time morphed into, he's done some really big outdoor public works installations in Detroit and some other things that I think in some ways have become more famous, but I find his early work really interesting. And so, that's another one. I don't know that I have anything contemporary to offer. That's maybe more Jack and Katie's area, but Julia, those are two, if that's of interest. And you guys, I'll let you, if you've had a chance to think of something or not. We're lucky for you, we're at 12 o'clock, so you can
I was just
decide.
going to say, out of left field, I was going to say photographer. Gilles Perez is a French photographer who does a lot in political turmoil and photography. He's been present. It's a lot of where photojournalism meets art, and he's very interesting to me. So he's someone I always have an eye on. But anyway, thank you, everyone.
Thought of somebody that our former curator Laura Desmond told me about. Kent Monkman is an Indigenous Cree artist. I think also queer, and he kind of paints Indigenous figures into kind of more contemporary or old, like what's the artist I'm thinking? Like I think even Remington work, he kind of like plasters it with a whole new vision. Indigenous folk with their regalia and high heels and that kind of thing. So it's really interesting work that I like to see interesting shifts on things like that personally, but that's just on me. But Ashley, you had a question about NASA.
Yeah. So as a gallery, as a museum, how would we go about getting our hands on artwork from an illustrator that we would want to display? Particularly Nasa McMain, who was a friend of Sally Meeks Farms.
So we can all three maybe answer that again. Sorry, I was responding to an online question too. That would be something where we would start by looking into our client base and see if we know anyone who owns those pieces, and then we would gently approach them. We do encourage our clients to participate in exhibitions. We know it's good for the provenance and good for the value of the piece. So we have in the past with other museum exhibitions loaned our pieces and clients' pieces to museums. So I think it just kind of comes down to whether or not we have connectivity.
Right. We had a couple other chat questions. Something the Thecla, is it going to be online?
Yeah, I just yeah, I can verbally. It'll likely be a one-day event. We're still working on the details of how we're going to host this. Depending on who it's with, we could end up leaving some of the pieces up for a bit. We did that with the Harold Neal exhibition we just did. Not all the artwork, but some. Many of them are on our website, so those are always available electronically. Not all for the exhibition, because we will have some clients who own pieces that don't want to sell or are not on consignment right now that will likely loan pieces for this. Whether or not we do a catalog, I'm not sure at this point. Whether when we've done those in the past, we didn't always include all of the works. So, but we will have information that we might be able to share electronically of whatever we have on exhibition for sure. I don't know that we'll publish it, but that's a possibility.
Great. So I'll give everybody just a second to think about any other questions they have. But in the meantime, how can people find out more about Mongerson Gallery, get connected and, work with you?
Well, we have a website. It's mongersongallery.com. You can join our newsletter via the website. We're all on there, so you certainly can reach out to us. Maggie and Ashley know how to reach us for sure. So, we like to talk to people about art, so we are available.